Yes, I represent Body and Soul in South Africa. For those of you who don't know Body and Soul, we're a marketing body and we represent DMCs across the world. We have over 50 DMCs in our portfolio, which encompass probably over 100 destinations. And we do marketing and representation in South Africa. I've got colleagues in Europe, in Brazil, America. There's about 5 of us. Obviously, this whole thing, has stopped our business in its tracks, but we have continued to do marketing, which is what we, are employed to do. So we have been looking after our DMCs as much as we can in terms of promoting them, promoting their destination, and just using this opportunity to educate people and to build our relationships with people. I think that is absolutely key at the moment. There is not much more you can do other than strengthen relationships and ensure that you are available to your clients, and put out the goodwill that, will stand you in good stead, I think, for the future. So yeah, that's about it.
Thanks, Jill. For those of you who missed the first 2 minutes of our conversation, we're talking from South Africa, discussing opportunities for restarting travel within the region, Southern Africa. And right now, I'd like to hand over to Hilmar from Abenteuer Afrika Namibia, and we'd like to hear your perspectives. Thank you, Hilmar.
Thank you, Tess. Well, a brief background on Abenteuer Afrika Safari. We've been going for the last 27 odd years, and we've built up the reputation of being the #1 destination management company for Namibia. We also do some operations in our neighboring countries, not in South Africa, but together with my colleague Robin from CANSAF at Vic Falls, and of course in Botswana. So from a business that was turning about 42,000 people annually to 0 is quite an abrupt halt. So we struggle like everybody else does in tourism, except there are many things that are pointing towards the waking up after COVID. And one of the reasons that we are quite confident is Namibia is probably one of the least affected countries on earth. Of course, the clever people immediately tell us that that's only due to the fact that we are not testing. So out of the total population of 2.8 million people, only a couple of thousands have been tested. But despite all that, our hospitals are empty. Nobody is dying. Nobody is showing signs of this mysterious disease. So we are very confident that even though we've had large exposure, that either our government reacted well at the time, while we questioned it by closing the borders immediately. We were one of the first countries in Africa to close our borders. And that said, we are hoping and lobbying for the fact that the borders should also be the first borders to be opened again. So the proof will be in the pudding, but we are hoping that our borders will open. Currently, it's scheduled for a slow opening, careful opening, as they call it, in July. And business business to the new normal in August. We are hoping that is going to actually happen like that. The European countries are starting to open amongst themselves. Italy, who's been very badly hit, probably the worst in Europe, is over the curve, so to speak. So Italian month for travel is in August. So we are kind of setting our hopes up that there is going to be some business happening in August. We are also hoping that by then the South African curve will have flattened more. Of course, there's all kinds of theories of a second wave. I think nobody has a crystal ball, and the quicker we get this over and done with, the better. Quarantining, in my opinion, isn't helping anything. It's just procrastinating the problem. Sorry, quarantining, closing of borders. The quarantining that goes with it, of course, for people that are affected, they should be quarantined. There's no question about that. But the sick people should be quarantined and not the healthy ones. So we feel that we are busy with a drive in Namibia to actually protect the elderly, to anybody that shows any symptoms, to quarantine them, look after them, be careful about them, but let the rest of the business get going again. Because the few deaths that, in my opinion, worldwide, I say that with reluctance, but few in terms of the number of population that we have on Earth. So the few deaths of the coronavirus might actually be far less than the deaths that we will have in Africa of hunger and economic trouble throughout the world, with everyone being affected by this. So we are quite confident that when it does open, and there is airlift, because that's what everything is going to be dependent on, then Namibia and Southern Africa, maybe not South Africa in first line, but the rest of Southern Africa will be a great attraction, because there was never a lot of COVID there. Namibia specifically, the size of the country versus the population, and if you consider that Namibia is 2 times the size of Germany, so 1/3 of the size of South Africa, and only 2.8 million inhabitants, of which half are living on the Angolan border, which is the Ovambo people, and very little tourism actually reaches there. That means the exposure for people is absolutely at a minimum. And we're already in the process of implementing a protocol that will enable each establishment, each accommodation establishment, to ensure as much as possible that there is the minimum of contact. So all of these things are pointing towards a positive restart. But there are 3 things that need to happen. The borders need to open, airlift needs to happen, and the quarantining per se should be at a minimum. So that's ultimately what the future is going to depend on.
Thank you, Hilmar. That's great, and very positive indeed. Just for those people who may not be familiar with Namibia, could you give us just a little bit of a helicopter view, explaining what Namibia is about? Because I think there exist really great opportunities, especially for incentive groups, now with the whole social distancing being front of mind, that potentially our incentive groups would probably become smaller and looking for lodges and boutique hotels where one can buy out the place exclusively to kind of
Absolutely.
Almost isolate your group. Do you want to give us a bit of overview on Namibia and the product?
Well, Namibia as an African destination, of course, the number one thing that everybody thinks about in Africa is animals. And Namibia has spectacular animals, with Etosha National Park being one of the larger game reserves of Africa. But a lot of smaller private game reserves sort of in the center of the country, which make just that possible that you just mentioned, about smaller groups having exclusivity in the lodges. But then animals you find in every Southern African country. So that isn't what makes Namibia unique. What makes Namibia unique is the desert, which puts you even more remote than anything else. And to put up a tented camp just erected for your group in the Namib Desert. In the Namib Desert, people just think, what is desert? So I always like to qualify it. The Namib Desert as the oldest desert on Earth. It's a living desert, unlike the Sahara, for instance. There is life everywhere in the sand dunes. And the desert consists of sandy desert, rocky desert, which is the canyons that are carved into the alluvial plain, that actually bring to the surface one of the oldest pieces of the crust of the Earth. And that is so phenomenal and spectacular. And that's our main playground as far as incentive groups are concerned. So the not being in touch with people and having the experience, I believe that the values of the traveler are also going to change, have to change. I think this time, if anything, COVID has taught us something, it is to be humble and to try and travel with feeling, rather than trying to look to feeling with what is there, to experience what is there, rather than what we've been tempted to do in the past as far as incentives go, is to build Disneyland. And the crazier it is, the more successful the sale is. And instead of feeling whether the Dom Perignon is the right temperature, to actually experience what is from the area, the local beer, the dust, the sand, the feeling, that is going to be the future, in my opinion. And that is what people are going to buy.
That is amazing. I really agree with that sentiment, and it's really going back to values and discovering new things that people took for granted, and just reopening your eyes. Well, Hilmar, thank you so much for sharing that, and I really think we have an opportunity to showcase Namibia a bit more to our communities. But let's move along to your neighbors. Robin, over to you. If you can give us some background on what you do and what you've achieved, and where do you see all of this developing to? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tess. It's amazing, no matter how many times I listen to Hilmar, I find myself going a little bit sort of wistfully into dream world, and he's a hard act to follow. But yeah, I mean, we're so fortunate in our part of Africa to share borders with amazing countries like Namibia, and obviously Victoria Falls is right at the center of a very unique region of Africa that encompasses a number of countries. And if we just focus on Victoria Falls, at the 4 countries that share a border just 70 kilometers away, and imagine that as the epicenter, the center of a circle that goes out 500 kilometers in any one direction, you find yourself at the center of really one of the most wild, natural areas left on the planet, and one that is filled with megafauna, incredible wildlife species, as well as this incredible Victoria Falls, which is sort of becomes the focal point. So our business, CANSAF, a bit of a strange name. It comes from canoeing safaris. And when I left school, I went to a little school, a lovely school in Harare, as we do have fantastic schools in Zim, called St. George's College. Left there, done my A-levels. Folks wanted me to go to university, and I was unsure what to do. I ended up becoming a canoe guide on the Zambezi River, on a section of the river between the dam wall at Lake Kariba and a place called Kanyamba, which is approximately 260 kilometers downstream. And on that section of the Zambezi River, you've got what is known to those that know nature and wildlife and so on, the Zambezi Valley, which conjures up incredible mystical tales of people that have done canoe trips and so on down there. So I ended up with my bum firmly in a canoe, and that was my introduction to tourism. And, you know, how could you leave that? So my wife and I, 8 years later, had the opportunity to actually buy that original canoeing company, and it was called Canoeing Safaris. And we were very fortunate. The company that owned it, Shearwater, who is still a very fantastic company today. We had worked for them for a long time, and they provided us with an amazing opportunity. That was in 98. In 2000, Zimbabwe's perception dropped off to a large degree, and we had a sort of moment of madness in our country, but at no time did that affect our actual tourists. In fact, as many people are unaware that although Zim has been through tumultuous times, no tourists have ever been put in danger as a result of those. But anyway, our tourism dropped off in that part of Zimbabwe, and we moved our company to Victoria Falls, and we had to evolve. There was already adventure companies running canoeing and so on there, so we set up this company focusing on running corporate groups. So that was in 2002, and since then we've just been overwhelmed with how fortunate that we've been. We've partnered with amazing companies like Body and Soul, and met characters like Hilmar, and learned our way into the incentive world and into the game, and had great fun. We've been very fortunate to run some amazing programs. But we've also seen the product base evolve here in Victoria Falls to suddenly now, I mean, I did a presentation with Gill the other day. We were looking at 16 large properties in Victoria Falls, four large properties, Royal Livingston, David Livingston, the Avani, have all developed in Livingston, and a plethora of lodges and so on, literally right around the falls and inside those parks. So we've grown really well, and obviously the leisure market is doing fantastically, and that's still the dominant market that's coming in here. But the incentive market has also grown, and you know, small groups and large groups and fun groups and stay groups, they all are starting to really put Victoria Falls on the map. But in amongst that, you know, this disaster that's hit us, and I'm not going to, you know, we're very much in a similar situation to Hilmar, so I'm not going to run back through, you know, how safe we are and so on. Those similarities are there. I mean, our statistics are very low. The reality is that probably our testing is very low, but you know, the fact remains that very few people are dying from strange causes and so on. So we would assume the number, the badly affected cases of COVID are either very low, or COVID has been here and run through the people and it's gone, and there's this sort of natural immunity, that for one, that's what we're hoping. But at the end of the day, there's very little illness that we can put a finger on for COVID. But the real fallout we've got here, I mean, like everywhere in tourism around the world, is we've got this great growth that has happened in this period of time. But it's not, it's been wonderful to see the growth, but we've almost haven't had a chance to catch our breath and bank huge amounts of money and so on. So we're in a dangerous situation here. I'm not talking so much about our business. I mean, obviously we're all affected by it, but it's not an old destination that's, you know, we're pretty new. And so our concern is twofold. How quick we can get back into tourism, as we all concerned about. How well are these companies going to be able to survive this period? You know, a lot of them have grown quite fast and got to where they are and are doing an incredible job, great successes and so on. But are they going to be able to hold on to the other side, the post-COVID that we're all looking for? And this is where that balance, and I don't envy our governments and the powers that be, you know, that huge decision, but we really on a bit of a precipice if this thing goes for another 2 or 3 months without decent, reasonable numbers coming back in here. I mean, we could, to all intents and purposes, you know, we can get some domestic tourism happening, but you know, that's not going to pay the bills. I'm really hoping that South Africa is going to pull themselves back from the rhetoric we're hearing at the moment, because, you know, really for our region, if we don't get South African travel in here in a reasonable period of time, we're really going to see some big problems for the companies on the ground here. And then obviously from there, we're actually seeing that actually the international countries and so on, they're looking to possibly look at traveling and so on more. And as Hilmar says, you know, that's all dependent on airports opening up, borders opening up, and so on. So we can go down that road. We're very much along those same lines as Hilmar. But something that is the second thing that's worrying us here, those, you know, that are spending time on the ground really and have had a chance to sort of analyze where our problems are coming, and that is on the wildlife front. So there's always been a battle. The battlefield is, you know, habitat loss in Africa for the long-term future of tourism is the battle line. And obviously we're moving towards hunting still plays a role, but more and more non-consumptive and photographic tourism is covering these bills that make the wild habitat viable. So the longer our tourism remains low, the more at risk we are of immediate loss of animal species. I mean, just in the microcosm here around Victoria Falls, we've got anti-poaching units out there and so on, but we know that their funding has dropped off. And if you take that and expand that out into that 500 kilometers area and further afield to the Etoshas and the community areas in Namibia and up into Zambia, and where we were going on a great path of sort of expansion of this wildlife area and sensitizing the communities in living in these transient areas where the elephant herds pass through and so on. We were on a good path there. The danger is we falter and we move back from that, and how hard it is going to be to get that momentum back to maintain this wild, incredibly wild, amazing area that we've got here. So that to me is at the forefront of our concern right now. And as a result, we're working with a small team here in Victoria Falls to try and light a fire, to try and put the energy that we may be putting day to day into marketing and pushing tourism into rather getting online programs, getting film crews out into the field, getting them to meet anti-poaching teams, taking footage, and trying to relay this concern that we've got to the rest of the world. And hopefully we can get some assistance to help these people on the ground in the front line.
Thank you. Wow, Robin. That's indeed a great consideration, which I don't think is to the front of people's minds. And hopefully we can use this conversation to actually highlight that reality and at least get the message out there. So realistically speaking, in your part of the world, are hotels and tourism attractions closed? Are they allowed to operate? What is your situation?
There were one or two lodges that have been given because we were left with a very small sprinkling of tourists that we just couldn't get out in time. So we had to have some properties get permission to remain open throughout, but those were small properties. The larger hotels all closed. And I must say, they've all had and been very transparent with us that, you know, and offered us the opportunity to go and inspect what they're doing to make sure cleanliness is taking place, hygiene and so on. But no, they were closed. And just in the last week, we have started to see certain properties get permission. All the properties are now allowed to open, but they have to go through a bunch of different hoops, hygiene, put staff through testing and so on. So some of them have decided to wait until we move to a softer stage, but there are some that are deciding to open up. So we've got a few more properties open. Activities, most of the activities operators are closed firmly at the moment. It's just a numbers thing and staff, you know, it's very that balancing act. So yeah, I mean, our rainforest, on the Zambian side, the rainforest is open, which is great. That was open. It's been open now for about a week. The president actually came, President Lungu came and opened that park. I think it's wonderful. Our park on this side remains closed. There are some concerns about, you know, how that's going to be managed, but we are hoping and we're lobbying to try and get that reopened, because we think that'll be like a psychological event almost to reopen the rainforest, and hopefully we'll be able to move on from there. But at the moment, most is closed.
Right. But by listening to both you and Hilmar, it certainly sounds as the awareness of health protocols are there, many of them in place, which I think will be key to help governments decide, okay, fine, let's start trading, let's open up our borders. And as you mentioned, that we might not see South Africa part of the fold initially, but there's certainly opportunities for countries within the region to start trading. And looking at East Africa, things, Kenya especially, even Rwanda, potentially Ethiopia, where the airlines are still operating domestically and regionally, would you say there are opportunities to bring in foreign tourists via East Africa rather than South Africa?
Yes, and that's an area we're looking at. We're chatting to Namibia, because obviously we've got a Windhoek link. But the most exciting stories we are hearing, just like you were saying, out of East Africa, we're hearing Tanzania really talking potentially about opening their borders, and we hope that there'll be an avenue through there. We do have flight access from Nairobi, and we're talking more and more to travel agents and tour operators in Kenya and East Africa to see if we can start twinning with them. It's a wonderful time of year coming in our part of the world, and that's the time when we see these masses of this megafauna collecting on floodplains and so on. So, we're going to miss a season, an incredible season. So for those people that have got the budget and the confidence to travel again, I think that the most amazing safari of our era is going to be the safari that you're going to take in September, October, or August, September, October this year, because there's going to be very few others out there. So, if you can combine East Africa with ours, at what we call the Zambezia region, the sort of the area that supplies the water for the Zambezia, and that includes Namibia, of course, and all the way to Malawi and Mozambique, this area of Africa, you come and do a safari in here, you're not going to have many other people to contend with. So it's going to be a wonderful time.
That will be a magnificent experience, no doubt. Before I go back to Joel, Hilmar, did you want to add to any of that?
No, I feel that Robin pretty much mirrors my own feelings about the area. One thing perhaps, Robin, you could speak about also is you have this brilliant project running at the moment. Do you want to tell us about it?
Yeah, thanks, Hilmar. Yeah, so, with our concerns about wildlife, we're using this initiative called hashtag Sport for Conservation, and we've launched a product called the Conservation Games through making contact with guys over the last 2 months. My brother Luke and I have managed to round up 60 international sports people from our region mainly, but also some Springbok captains. We've got John Smith, and we've just had Corne Cricket play a game this morning. We've got cricketers from Zim like Grant Flower, golfers, and all taking part in this what we call the Conservation Games, which will be one-on-one matchups, where these guys will talk about their careers a little bit, answer some questions, but also we'll talk about conservation. So they've created their identities and told us what their favorites are and so on. So they should be interesting, and you'll be able to, on any social media platform, you'll be able to find the Conservation Games, or you can find it through the hashtag Sport for Conservation.
That's awesome. That is a really great story, that, Robin, and we'll definitely be following that and sharing it. So, Jill, let's hand back to you. I think you've got some positive notes from Europe and elsewhere to share with us. All yours.
Thanks, Tess. Yeah, just touching on what Robin and Hilmar have said as well. I think we've seen amazing pictures of wildlife returning to areas where there's been little wildlife. There's amazing stories about all the beauty that's returning, and as they've said, I mean, what an amazing opportunity to actually experience those places with few people and animals that aren't used to people. So I think that could be some amazing opportunities, as you say, for those pioneer travelers that are prepared to jump on the planes. And I do believe that there's a lot of sentiment out there. People that are used to traveling, they want to continue to travel. And I do believe as soon as those protocols are put in place by suppliers, whether it's the airports, the aircrafts, the transfer, those will be put in place. And there's absolutely no reason why one shouldn't then travel. Obviously it's not going to be in the big groups. It's not going to be lots of people together, but there's no reason why you can't still journey to places that you've always said you need to go to. So I think possibly the incentive travel side, there might be some adjustments to it. There's a lot of virtual conferencing going on, which I think is a very good idea in the meantime, because I think that also gives people an opportunity to continue to look after clients. There's always a need to get together for people to meet. So do the virtual thing in the meantime. But yeah, just getting back to Africa and the comparisons between Africa and Europe, I think Europe is opening up. I think one of the key things that we need to look at here are practical things. There have been a lot of discussions and a lot of webinars recently about how we all need to stick together and look to the future and everything, but not that many practical things. And I think obviously the practical things would be things like those protocols being put in place, but also they need to be sensible. They can't just be put in place for the sake of being put in place, and actually make it virtually impossible for people to actually adhere to. So they do need to be based on common sense, and for people to be able to follow them. I think the testing is so important. If there was a way for us to find testing that was a quicker way of testing, we could get people in through airports. If we could test ahead of arrival at an airport, if you, for example, could do a 2-hour test, you could isolate people in a hotel that's geared for this near airports, test them before they are allowed into the airport, and then obviously all those protocols I've just spoken about would fall into place. You need to look at the insurance. So if they were tested and came out that they couldn't travel, what would their ability be to be able to get the return on that travel that they might have paid for? Are there new insurances that we need to be looking at? So I think it's, there are quite a few practical things. We need to make visas easier for people to obtain. There needs to be possibly funding from the government to provide equipment to properties for them to be able to maintain these protocols. Maybe do away with visa costs, do a health passport. If you're applying for a Schengen visa from South Africa to travel into Europe, we need to look at just make it easier for people. People are cash strapped, but I do think they are wanting to travel. So let's not put up barriers in place for those people that do want to be those pioneer travelers. Maybe we need to focus more on the destinations like Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, where there are open spaces and opportunities to not be confined to cities, or to do travel for younger people and those people that are less at risk of getting sick or carrying the germs or whatever. So I think there's just so many obstacles and not much practical forward thinking that I've seen recently. And I think that's what everybody's just wanting desperately is tell me what to do and I will do it, in order to just, get us back traveling. For example, would a transit flight through Johannesburg allow people to fly onto Victoria Falls and onto Windhoek? If South African borders are closed, can we allow our international travelers to transit through South Africa in order to get onto the regional destinations? I think it seems the projections for South Africa are quite dire in terms of our borders, but we shouldn't have the effect of the SADC countries because of South Africa. And I think, possibly if we allow things to happen that will change people's patterns, that they might change those permanently. So government does need to look at how to prevent the future loss of routes that have always been successful, because if people find other ways to do things better, they might revert to those, and that South Africa might then be looking at less tourists because of the negative impact. So there's a lot of things we have to look at, and I think we're all looking for that light at the end of the tunnel, and I do see Europe shining that light at the moment. The fact that they have created corridors between countries, I think that's a fantastic idea. The one between New Zealand and Australia, the Baltic states are open to each other. Italy has opened up. Italy, if you think of where it was a few months ago, and where they are now, they are open to tourists, and people are starting to travel again. Wow. So I think that will inspire people, that Europeans travel within Europe. We all need to look at our own regions. We need to focus on, let's look out for the area around us in the beginning. And I think naturally those long haul opportunities will follow, and it will take a while to get back. But I think, if we can learn to adjust to this new way of thinking and traveling, we can overcome the fear and manage that, mitigate the danger, and manage it, and allow people to take their, make up their own minds, let them travel if they want to, because I think there will be those pioneer travelers that will get back onto those flights and will start traveling again.
Yeah. Great, Jill. No, that's really great, and some important and meaningful sentiments there as well. But in terms of, you talk about the corridors, I certainly see an opportunity for our governments to hold hands and play nicely and look at possibly reopening between South Africa and Namibia for a start, because those areas where those borders are minimal, if any, infections at all. And similar with South Africa and Botswana, which is a great corridor into Zambia and Zimbabwe, indeed. So perhaps let's see if we can lobby those motivated to government, to all our governments. Something we're certainly looking towards doing in the near future is setting up regional workshops to the industry at large, between tourism authorities, suppliers, tour operators, airlines, as well as the Wesgro airlift team, to look at new opportunities for airlift across Africa. We have no idea what's happening with South African Airways, and I don't think we should be holding our breath. But there are perhaps other airlines and some of the African airlines that are already operating that could perhaps take over some of those routes, even put in new routes to improve travel across Africa. I think one of our biggest challenges always has been airlift amongst African countries, and those are exceptionally expensive where they do exist. So we need to look at fixing that to make airlift more accessible and certainly cheaper across the continent. And then very important thing you touched on, Jill, as well, is the insurance aspect. So next week, I haven't confirmed the date and time yet, but we will have Andre de Toy from SATIB and First Equity to address a few very important questions to the industry regarding liability, travel insurance that's not being paid out, business closure or income protector insurance that's not being paid out. I think the insurance industry has just been completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume. But we need to hear from the insurance companies where we as businesses stand in terms of, we've paid our monies, why are we not protected? And a solution accordingly. But neither here nor there. I think we've heard very constructive comments from the whole panel. Very positive between Namibia, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe. It sounds as if everybody is ready to roll. All we need is to get that green light, and we can start trading again, get economies back on. And as you say, Robin, the animals. I don't think people really consider how the lack of tourism and that spend impacts on the conservation aspects of our part of the world. I think that is basically everything from me. Any closing comments? Shall we start with you, Hilmar?
No, all good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everything has been said. Thank you,
Great.
Tess.
I appreciate you sharing and taking the time. Robin?
No, thank you very much for having me, and it's wonderful to see you all.
Likewise, likewise. Jill?
Yeah, thanks, Tess. It's you're a great leader in this industry, and we appreciate you being our spokesperson. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, everyone.